Okay, so we're going to deal with the second chapter, okay? So which is entitled Systemic Functional Linguistics and Register, okay? So in this chapter, if you have read it, you're going to notice that it talks about the following points, okay? So second chapter using our main textbook. It talks about or describes what is meant by SFL or Systemic Functional Linguistics. So that's the purpose of the chapter. It describes what Mac Holliday introduced in a variety of his publications in relation to his own perspective of analyzing grammar, okay, which is referred to as Systemic Functional Linguistics, okay, also referred to sometimes as grammar. So it also talks about register, which you have already seen in relation to pragmatics, okay. It also talks about first language acquisition, the process of first language acquisition, but using his own perspective of functional linguistics, okay, in the sense that the child doesn't only learn the language, the structure, the form, but he also learns the functions for which we use the language, the meanings we want to convey in our interactions using the language. So he also tries to learn this and acquire this in his acquisition or her acquisition. It also talks about conversation and register and how they are related. And it talks about classroom discourse, but the reason why I didn't want to talk about it today, because in the chapter it's very small section, whereas for you it needs to be broader than that. So that's why I'm not going to deal with it today, and we will deal with it in other following classes. It also talks about speech and writing, differences between the language of speech and the language of writing. So. Concerning the following classes, as I told you, we're going to use other references. So I will be presented that. I will be taking views from here and there. So these are other books that I will be relying on when talking about classroom discourse. Okay, it will be classroom discourse analysis, a functional perspective, and exploring classroom discourse language in action. Right? So that's why you can notice now. This is the second new outline where I drop classroom discourse and I keep only the others, which I will talk about, okay, and try to discuss today. So for introduction, Systemic Functional Linguistics is a theory of language and discourse developed by Mac Holliday and his followers, right? And Systemic Functional Linguistics considers language as a network of systems. There is a system, there is something organized, okay? Something organized, but not only in terms of structure, in terms of meaning, in terms of functions, the functions we perform, or choices, or expressing meaning. So there is some kind of organization, there is some kind of systematicity, system going on in there, and also there is a focus on the idea of expressing meaning, functions. We use language to express functions. Not only, okay, and express or convey meaning. Functional is concerned with what language does. Maybe it reminds you of pragmatics. What language does, okay? Why do we use language? We use language for, requesting. We use language for asking for permission. We use language for asking for help, and so on and so forth. Now, these are functions. We use language for doing something. How it does it, and how it does it, they're also talking about the way we do it, rather than with simply the structure of the language, which has been the focus of other schools, namely the generative school, Chomsky and structuralists as well, where they focused merely on the structure of the language. So this theory came as a reaction against that, because he noticed that they focused mostly on language, on the structure, on the form, and they neglected another main area of language, which is what purposes we use language for, okay, and what we use it, what do we do with it, with language, and how it, etc. Now, concerning the publications of Mac Holiday, which you have, they are introduced for you in the chapter. Just a recap for you. Okay, so these are the main publications of this linguist. An Introduction to Functional Grammar, revisited or revised by Matheson, Holiday, and Matheson 2004. So you can see that it talks about functional grammar. It's a kind of grammar. He has his own tools of describing grammar. Not only talking about clauses, words, okay, grammatical forms, but he has on his own terminology, his own way of describing grammar using the notions of functions. Okay, why we use language and how we use language to perform those functions. Another publication of his is Spoken and the Written Language. Okay, 1989, and I'm going I'm regressing here. Okay, I'm going from newest to oldest. Spoken and Written Language, 1989. Language, Context, and Text, Aspects of Language in a Social Semiotic Perspective, Holiday and Hassan. Hassan is his wife. Hassan is not a man, his wife. Okay, 1985, 1989. Okay. You were confused? You told somebody like Arabian, but you see, you didn't read the chapter, you see? So in the chapter it's mentioned for you there, that it's his wife. Learning How to Mean, Holiday, 1975. The Linguistic Sciences and Language Teaching, Holiday et al., one of his main publications where he incorporates his views of language, functional linguistics, systemic functional linguistics in relation to pedagogy, in relation to teaching and learning. Okay, so you can notice that he focuses on the idea of functions and why we use language for. Now, Mac Holiday's influencers, okay? The people who influenced this person, this linguist. First of all, we have his teacher, okay, Firth, a British linguist, who advocated the notions of language as a set of systems. This guy talked about a focus on the idea of systematicity, or the fact that language is a set of systems, and the importance of context in the interpretation of meaning. So, Holiday was not the first one to introduce that. He developed the notions, and that's how science progresses, okay? You have people mentioning a few things, and then others coming after that, developing that, okay? Malinowski, a social anthropologist of Polish origin, working at London University, and he advocated the relation between language and context. Again, going outside of this focus on the form and the structure and taking into account the context, the situation, the speakers, and so on. So he advocated the relation between language and context, and his notion of multiplicities of languages according to situations. You can have the same expression, but you can use it to convey different meanings depending on the context, different contexts and situations where you are. And hence the significance of introducing this new functional linguistics. Of course, Worf, the American linguist, who advocated the view how language was influenced by the environment. No need to go into this guy, okay, so you already know his story and his views. Helmslav, Danish linguist, who advocated the notion of language as a level of expression of a higher level semiotic. Okay. So I will be going this way and correcting myself from time to time because I might have done a few mistakes. So here it's expression, okay, who advocated the notion of language at the level of expression of higher level semiotic. Okay. System. Semiotics, symbols, The Prague School of Linguistics functional approach. You know, the Prague school, they focused on the functional, approach to language and phonology. And they're focused on the textual metafunction, which we're going to view later on, in this class. So what does systemic mean? Systemic means language is viewed as a network of interrelated systems or set of choices for making meanings. And these are not random, they are organized. There is a system linking things, okay? They are not random. That's what we mean by systemic, okay? An example using his approach from his own way of analyzing grammar. So he talks about different types of modalities and modes, etc. So we have mood, which we are going to see later on again. Indicative, so this is the mood system of the English clause. So you know the clause. And we can use the clause to convey different moods, okay? So we can use it for conveying the indicative or the imperative. Again, the indicative is divided into two categories, subcategories, declarative and interrogative. The imperative is also divided into two subcategories, inclusive, exclusive, okay? Inclusive in the sense that when you want to convey an imperative form, you can be inclusive. Let's sit down. Inclusive. Or exclusive, where you give an order, you know, so frank, you know, clear order, imperative form. Exclusive, where you say somebody, sit down. Yeah, some kind of firmness going on in there. And then, for the interrogative form, okay, we have closed interrogative and open interrogative, okay? You see his own way of analyzing grammar. He doesn't talk about, so it is used there, WH question, just because that's what we are familiar with as terminology. Okay, we have yes, no, that's what we are familiar with as terminology. But his own terminology, he talks about closed interrogative, open interrogative, etc. So that's an example of which shows that there is a kind of systematicity, so that language is systemic, okay? Now, what does functional mean? Focus is on function rather than form. Okay, what we use language for, to do what, etc. What functions we use language to perform. Language is viewed as practical means of expressing meanings rather than as an abstract set of relations. We're no more talking about just language as such independent, you know, okay, like the competence notion or the structuralist, okay. So you have structuralist, the dichotomy, the structural dichotomy. We have competence performance and we have parole, long parole. So we have long. We're no more just talking about long or competence, okay? There is a focus on the practicalities of language and meanings for which we use the language. Then we have lexicogrammar, one main approach, which we will see again later. Lexicogrammar, one main approach of ESFL, considers that grammar and vocabulary lexis work together to convey meanings. That is to say, grammar, grammatical words, and vocabulary items work together, okay, in order to convey meaning. So instead of using the traditional terminology like grammatical words, like vocabulary items, he is referring to them as kind of system alone, referred to as lexicogrammar. Okay? We're going to come back to it later. Now, concerning the systemic functional linguistics, we advocate three types of metafunctions. Now we are starting going into the details of his own terminology and his own way of analyzing language using this approach, systemic functional linguistics. Additional, interpersonal, and textual, okay? Additional, interpersonal, and textual. What is the word you can get from ideational?
Ideas.
Ideas. The word you can get from interpersonal? Persons, relations, inter. Yes. And then textual? Text. So that's it, okay? And that's what we are going to talk about in relation to each kind of meta function. So, ideational, yes?
I mean, we're talking here about written text or text in general. Maybe even including spoken language.
Text. Text, written, but written here. We're mainly talking about written, okay? Textual. So the ideational, it is concerned with things existing in the world. It is concerned with things existing in the world. It deals with things that are existing in where we live, in our environment, in the context, in the situations. Okay? And they are real, they are not imagined. It is concerned with actions, events, and states or processes. For example, we can talk about run, occur, be, etc. So it is concerned with actions, events, and states, processes. It is concerned with participants in those processes. It is concerned or deals with participants in those processes, because processes alone, they mean nothing, right? So you need to have actions, you need to have states, events, processes, that's number one. And then you need to have participants in those processes. Okay? He, she, man, car, weather. Okay? So here, take in whatever language, whatever sentence, whatever paragraph or sentence, okay? The minimum is a sentence. If you take that, you're going to notice that there is this kind of metafunction going on in there. Additional metafunction, which is concerned with actions, events, and states. So if you take a language, there is something there. There is an event. There should be an action. There should be a state, referred to generally as a processes. Okay? Also, there should be participants in those processes, in those sentences, where there are events, actions, etc. There are also participants involved in those processes. And these are referred to usually as by pronouns or nouns. Okay? He or she or Ahmed or weather or car. Okay? It is concerned with circumstances in which these processes occur. That's the notion of adverbs. Okay? The how, the when, and the where. Okay? So if you take whatever sentence, not all of the sentences, but usually in the sentences you have actions, I repeat again, actions, events, states, referred to as processes. In the same sentences, you should also have participants. And in the same sentence again, you should have circumstances, okay, using our own familiar terminologies, adverbs. The how, the when, and the where to describe these. Okay? So you can have an event, you can have an action, you can have a state. This state, okay, needs to be described. Okay? Needs to be described either using how or when or where. So the experiential component, experience and understanding the world, this is the circumstances. There needs to be an experience, a context, a circumstance, a situation. Okay? And also there should be some kind of logical relationship between all those. Okay? They don't go against each other. They go in harmony with each other in logical order. Okay? So there should be the experiential components referring to the experience, the circumstance, and all of these, they are all linked together via these components called logical components, whereby they are linked logically, harmoniously, etc. Okay? So the ideational. So you can see here the word ideational is taken, as we said, from ideas. And these ideas could be related to actions, events, and states. Okay? Or they could be related to the participants in those actions, events, and states, the ideas. And also the ideas could be related to the circumstances, the how, the when, and the where. Okay? And these ideas are combined together in a logical way. That's why we need this logical component, okay? And because we are talking about systemic. We're talking about systemic, right? So systemic needs some kind of logic going on in there, linking things, harmony, okay? Organization, meaningful organization, okay? And then the interpersonal, it has to do with relations between participants in spoken texts and written texts, because you can have the same thing either orally, oral communication, or in written communication. You are having interpersonal relationships between the different participants. Textual. It is related to the construction of text, how it is held together. The metafunction here we're talking about is referring to the construction of a text, how it is linked together, how it is organized. This is the metafunction, okay? Textual metafunction. And here we talk about cohesion, reference, etc. Because we are talking about text. Okay? And here textual simply because it's a different kind of metafunction that needs to be also taken into account because we are dealing with writing. So again, writing, we know that there are a number of things in relation to the organization of text, which is to do with the theme, with the organization, with the cohesion, etc. Reference, coherence. Okay? Now, these different types of metafunctions, they are interdependent, right?
They don't constrain each other.
They don't constrain or restrict each other. So, they are interdependent. Hassan, 1995, advocates that the three metafunctions affect one another. That the three metafunctions affect one another. Okay? They affect one another. Any stretch of language conveys the three functions at the same time. You should have the ideational, you should have the interpersonal, and you should have, if you're talking about writing, you should have textual, okay, a metafunction. Halliday and Mathieson, 2004, argue that they do not restrict or constrain each other, that is to say, they are exclusive of each other, in other words. One doesn't accept the other. No, you can never have an ideational metafunction without the interpersonal metafunction. You can never have it, okay? And you can never have the interpersonal metafunction without the textual or others. Some linguistic features express more some metafunction than others. This is what we can have. You can have some linguistic features, linguistic items, lexical items, grammatical items. They can reflect or convey one kind of metafunction more than the others. That's what we can have. I'm going to show you as an example, which you have in your book as well. The lexis, for example. The lexis, what do we mean by lexis? We mean the lexical items, vocabulary. Okay? Table and notions like extremis, we have it as an example in there. You see it, okay? All those are lexical items. So lexis is usually related to the additional metafunction, because we're talking about ideas, right? So ideas need words. So it's usually related to ideas. But these, there are some lexical items which can be more related or overlap with the interpersonal. Here we are going into the analysis of text, for example, or even oral communication. You can have somebody talking about extremist.
Yeah, we're talking about a person.
Extremist, yes. Extremist for you is not extremist for me.
This person asks you.
Okay, it is related to the person's ideology, background, etc. So here it is related to idea and also related to the interpersonal metafunction
And perceptions of
and perceptions of the individuals. Okay, so extremist. So here we can have lexis. It's more related to additional metafunction, but also can overlap with the interpersonal metafunction. Another example, modals and pronouns. Okay? So modals, as you know, they are interpersonal. They reflect or more related to the interpersonal. They reflect the modality of the person. Okay? What do you want to express as a modality? You want to express permission or asking for a request or obligation or necessity, probability, whatever. So it's related to the person. The same thing for pronouns. Pronouns, they are also related to the interpersonal, referring to somebody. Okay? But it is, as we said here, it is related to the interpersonal metafunction. That's true. But it also, for example, the case for pronouns, it can overlap with the textual. For example, pronouns. Pronouns, if you go to a text, you can find the pronouns, they refer to each other. Okay, so there is a reference from one to another. And that's how the cohesion and the coherence of the text comes. Okay, because of this reference. Okay, so pronouns, they reflect interpersonal metafunction, but they are also, or overlap with the textual metafunction. So this is what we mean by the interdependence of metafunctions. Conjunctions usually referring to textual metafunctions because you are talking about linking sentences together. Okay? So this is the meaning of interdependence. Then so these are the first three key terms to remember about systemic functional linguistics. We have the additional metafunction, we have the interpersonal metafunction, and we have the textual metafunction, and we said that they are interdependent, they don't constrain each other. You can have overlapping between one and the other. Okay. Another key term introduced is the systemic functional linguistics context of situations. This is taken from your book. Okay, so you see there we have the metafunctions. I want you to take metafunctions, focus on metafunctions there. You have metafunctions, then you have additional, interpersonal, textual. So this is the way how systemic functional linguistics describes grammar. Okay, this is its terminology. These are its principles. Okay. So if you take a language, a grammar, text, spoken discourse, or whatever, how do we use these kinds of terminology like metafunctions, the additional, interpersonal, and textual. Okay, you can take a piece of sentence, piece of oral communication, and then you analyze it in this way using these terms: additional metafunction, interpersonal metafunction, and textual metafunction. Another one that you see here on the top, contextual parameters. We have field, tenor, and mode. These are related to the context. That's why they are called contextual parameters. They are more related to the context, to the situation. And we can have different types of context, different aspects related to the context or the circumstance or the situation. We can describe the field of the context, we can describe the tenor of the context, and we can also describe the mode of the context. Lexicogrammar, we will see it later on when we go through it. Lexicogrammar will also have more terminology, more principles. Don't look at it that now, okay? So field, what does it mean, field? It's field, or it refers to the why, about what. Hudson, 1980. Purpose of interaction, that's the field of context. Because remember pragmatics, that's a kind of pragmatics, right? Simply, purely. It refers to the why, the intention of the intention of the speaker. So the context, why, about what, and then the purpose of the interaction. What is the purpose of the interaction? What is the interaction all about? So that's the field. This is one aspect of context that can help us understand language and the meaning of what we say and what we tell. Tenor. To whom? Hudson, 1980. The relations between interactants in the texts or in the context, oral communication. The relationship between speakers or the interaction differ from one context to another, from one situation to another. Formality, informality, jobs register, which we will see later on again. So, to whom you are talking about. So, language the language we use differs from context to another in relation to this aspect of context, which is referred to using systemic functional linguistics terminology, tenor. To whom. Finally, a mode. That is the how. Right? How, again using Hudson's terminology, way of explaining these terms. How. The language is organized and functions in the interaction, spoken or written or both, expository or didactic or persuasive, the mode, okay? You can have expository, you can have didactic, you can have persuasive, argumentative, the how, okay? The how, okay? So that's the mode, okay? That's the mode. So you can see here, these three aspects of context. They also help us understand, okay, the meanings for which we use language. Okay? So, this is a new, completely different perspective from what we know. Okay? Mark Halliday has introduced a number of elements that are related to him. But they are all similar to pragmatics, in some way different. Okay? He prefers to talk about functions, okay? But in pragmatics, they talk about intentions, etc. So, I repeat again from the beginning. As I said, the main principles, basis of, systemic functional linguistics are the metafunctions. Ideational, ideas, events, okay? And actions, etc. And states. We can have the interpersonal, the participants in the event, and of course the textual, which is related to texts. And we said that they are related. There is interdependence between them. You can't have one without the other. There is a complete harmony between them. Okay, one completes the other. Okay, and sometimes you can have even kind of an overlapping, between the different types of metafunctions using the different aspects of language, lexis. You can have some vocabulary items that are mostly related to the ideational metafunction, but they can be interpersonal. Okay? And then we have now the aspects of context, another aspects or parts of his terminology, principles for analyzing language and understanding the meanings for which we use language. So we have field, and we have tenor, and we have mode. Is that okay? And now we move on to another aspect related to systemic functional linguistics, which focuses on register. So people using the PCs are trying to be smart students, right? Not the opposite, I guess. Yes, Yunus? Taking notes using PC. Ibrahim, taking notes using your PC. Just want to make sure about this before. Yes, that's very good. That's why I didn't go to the negative side first. I went to the positive side first. I'm always that kind of person. Okay, and then if I notice that it's not the positive side, then we can have another discourse, since we're talking about discourse, right? Yes, Khadija?
Discourse that should be analyzed.
Yes, it should be analyzed, yes. Okay, so we move on and we talk about register. As we have seen in sociolinguistics, when we talk about register, we are usually talking about what? Particular what? Field, situation, occupation, basically. Professional, occupation, etc. That's what we talk about when we are referring to register. So that's exactly the same thing here. Sociolinguistics, they prefer to talk about register. You explain it using the word occupation, okay, and also situation, etc. But here he says a configuration of meanings that are typically associated with a particular situational configuration of field, mode, tenor, using his own way, his own terminology. Because let us go back to, just to refresh your memories, maybe. So, field, what is we about? Field, tenor, and mode. We said why, to whom, and how. So you can notice that it's kind of a bit wider than just the mere description of sociolinguistics occupation. It's more than that. Because register in sociolinguistics merely related to job, kind of job. Okay, doctors, engineers, and their own language. Here it is broader than that. It talks about why, to whom, and how. Job or no job, it's no problem, okay? So these are, okay, let us now go back to, so a configuration of meanings that are typically associated with a particular situational configuration, of field, mode, and tenor. So aspects related to field, mode, and tenor, they make a kind of register.
They are configured, if I understand, configured to a particular domain.
Mm-hmm.
The terminology, for example, that we use for nursing or for medical field, it's configured to that particular context.
Yes, for sociolinguistics.
They call it most of the time jargon, though it's a negative
Yes,
connotation.
yes, but here for systemic functional linguistics, configured not simply for. Okay, let us go back to. When you say why, when you say to whom, when you say how, okay, it doesn't necessarily mean job. You can be in a family meeting, ceremony, and then there is a why, there is to whom, there is the how. It's okay? So what we mean by configured here is why, what is the, is it for example requests? That's why, as an example, one example. And then to whom? Is it a request for teacher or a request for parent, father, to whom? And then is it to how, the way how you ask that, okay? Is it polite, formal, informal, intimate, not intimate? It doesn't talk about just occupation, configured just for a specific kind. There is no mentioning of job as such or occupation as such. We're taking situations, circumstances in general, and each specific circumstance is a kind of configuration. For example, in our class now, it's a kind of configuration where we have a specific field, specific tenor, specific mode related to us, to our context, to our circumstance. Okay? And if in a ceremony, marriage ceremony, people sitting at a table in front of their their lunch or dinner or whatever, there's a kind of specific configuration of all these three elements, not necessarily limited to just job. Okay? That's why register in the notions of systemic functional linguistics, as I'm telling you, is broader than the simple one of sociolinguistics. You need to make that difference and keep it in your mind. Okay? Good. So the last point there, registers can be identified according to field, tenor, or mode, of course. Now we go to another, you remember that chart I showed you in white? So we talked about metafunctions, so we have three. And then we have talked about contextual parameters, the field, tenor, and the mode. And now there is the other one which I told you, which is called Lexicogrammar, where we have other elements there as well, other principles, other terminologies of systemic functional linguistics to describe language and to try to understand better the meanings for which we use language. Okay. This is an example, contextual parameters and associated lexicogrammar for the biology lecture register. There's a kind of lecture, biology, about biology. Okay, this is a kind of register, okay? And then it is described using these terms, using these terminologies we have introduced so far. So we have the contextual parameters, field, an area of information about the given biological topic. That's the field. Okay. Tenor, the participants. Who are the participants? The tenor. It is the lecturer as expert giver of knowledge and student as novice recipients of knowledge, like you now, but in relation to different topic, different field. Okay. Mode, we have informal spoken monologue. Okay, the mode, the how, you remember the mode, it means the how. Informal spoken monologue, that's lecturing, in other words, with occasional breaks for questions supported by visual elements. It's expository, a lecture. So that's the mode, okay? Now we have described this lecture, this biology lecture register, using these terms we have introduced up to now, field, tenor, and mode. Now, how are we going to do that? Using the other terminologies of lexicogrammar. Lexicogrammar, just take the word first. It is divided into two. Lexis and grammar. Any language should have these two. Without these two, no language. And of course, using systemic functional linguistics, no functions, no meanings, no nothing. Okay? No metafunction, no, metafunctions, all of them, etc. And no parameters as well. So, of course, the lecture, since it talks about biology, so all the vocabulary there is going to be about biology, biological, lexis. Now, another aspect which is related to grammar, so this is a biological lexis, well, described lexis. Now, let's move on to grammar. Systemic functional language, it focuses more on what is called as clauses. Okay? Talks about clauses. So relational process clauses, and we're going to see them in detail afterwards, exactly with detail, focusing and stopping at each one of them, because there are different types of clauses. There is what we call relational process clauses, material process clauses, and others. But for the moment, if we take this biology lecture class, the register, in other words, using systemic functional linguistics terminology, we have verbs of being and existing. Each type of clause refers to different specific types of verbs and meanings conveyed by those verbs. For example, here we're going to, in this describing this lecture, the lecturer or the teacher usually uses verbs of being and existing. There is, there are, it exists. So he uses a lot of that. He's not going to tell you that the teacher uses many times the verb be. Okay? He's not going to tell you as a systemic functional linguist that the biology lecturer is using a lot of words or verbs like exists. So do you notice the terminology? Our common terminology, verbs. But using the systemic functional linguistics terminology, we're going to use what is referred to as lexicogrammar, and we're going to use one aspect of lexicogrammar, which is relational process clauses. He's going to tell you this way. You understand? The way how systemic functional linguistics analyzes language. Again, he's going to tell you, instead of telling you that the lecturer also uses a lot of verbs related to doing and actions and happenings, he's not going to tell you verbs as such. He's going to tell you that also the lecturer uses a lot of clauses which are referred to as material process clauses. What do we mean by material process clause? It's the clauses or the sentences where we have verbs of doing and actions. Okay? So that's the other type of description of the lecture using systemic functional linguistics terminology. You understand this? So, and you can see from these two so far that there is a combination of lexis and grammar. That's why it's called lexicogrammar. Lexis is one entity, it's fine, it's vocabulary items, lexicon, full stop. But for grammar, because we have different types of aspects related to grammar, so we have relational process clauses, and then we have material process clauses, and also the systemic functional linguist describing or analyzing this lecture is going to tell you that it's also mostly declarative clauses. Mostly declarative clauses. Occasional use of imperatives. Occasional use of interrogatives if interacting with the audience. And of course, concerning clauses, there are others which are not mentioned in here, but we're going to see them later. Existential process clauses, etc. So finally, we're going to say that discourse markers, because one of the main areas of discourse is this area of discourse markers. You know, when we are speaking, we use a lot of discourse markers. So he's going to tell you that the teacher uses a lot of discourse markers to signal construction of the lecture, such as well, okay, so, right, now, okay, like mine, okay, okay. So that's the way how systemic functional linguistics describes this kind of register, biology lecture register, using this component called lexicogrammar, right? So you can notice already that here we are no more just talking about, just one kind of occupation or job, okay? It's not limited just to occupation, it's broader. Analysis using systemic functional linguistics, and here we're going to focus on features related to field and in the additional metafunction. How, again, these are examples I'm telling you now, okay? They are also in your chapter. And these are just examples to explain further what we mean by these components and these terminologies, okay? So features related to field and the additional meta, let me correct myself again here, meta, function, not function. Maybe this sounds like fiction. That's why I wrote function. Okay. Metafunction. Is that okay? Metafunction. And in the following slides, we're going to describe this kind of text, okay, that is provided by the son of the author of the book we have, and it's in your book, in your chapter, okay, and we're going to analyze it using this terminology: metafunctions, additional, interpersonal, textual, contextual parameters, field, tenor, mode, lexicogrammar, okay, etc. So this is the text, okay. So, somebody can read it? Yes? Yes, Sophia?
My favorite fish is my parrot. He's not freaking great. We got him about 5 years ago. He has a gray body and a red tail. He's big, he's very sharp, and he can bite you. He can say lots of words like hello, how are you today, and whispery boyfriend. He hasn't gotten a name, We just call him parrot.
Yes, so that's the child's description of his pet, favorite pet. In this case, it's a parrot. Okay, so this is the kind of language he uses. Okay? And now what we're going to do is analyze this using this terminology, and we're going to focus here just on this relationship, okay, or combination of field and the additional metafunction. So we go one by one. The purpose is to go one by one to understand better these terminologies. You can take it, okay? Do you have the book with you? Yeah, you take it to keep it with you, to keep it in front of you, because I can't keep it for you. I have to move, okay, in the slides. So take it. What page is that? Yes. Okay, now let's go on. So if you focus on the language there, so the lexis relates semantically to the topic of the text. That's the main thing you can notice. It's related, the lexis is used there. It's related to the topic, or he's talking about parrots, so he's using terminology, vocabulary items related to parrot and the way the parrot acts, etc. He doesn't talk about music, instruments of music, etc. No, it talks, or he doesn't talk about something else. Okay, another animal, for example, another pet. Systemic functional linguistics works with a hierarchy of units or ranks as follows. There is, when we try to describe language like we have, we use hierarchy or ranks. Okay, hierarchy or ranks. How? Close, complex, close, group, word. Okay, sorry. I have to do it again. So complex, close, group, word. Now, the first thing you can notice here, like in our traditional terminology, the main element we talk about is a sentence, right? You don't have it in here, right? So it's no more existing in here. So it doesn't use the word sentence. You talk about clauses, okay? So of course, clauses, you can have two types of clauses, simple and complex clauses. Subordinate main clauses, that's the terminology we have, but using the terminology of systemic functional linguistics, we have clause complex. And then the other one, which you have, you can notice different from our terminology. So group instead of what? Yes, instead of phrases, group of words, okay? Instead of phrases. And of course, word, it's the main clearest, okay? So what do you notice here? The terminology we are using here, there's this hierarchy, okay? Ranks, from smallest to, longer, okay, or more complex. From simple again to more complex. That's another kind of hierarchy. The clause is the basic unit of analysis in systemic functional linguistics, and it consists of the following. This is the main, like in phonology. What is the main unit of analysis? Phoneme. Morphology, morpheme. Syntax, word, sentence. Morphology is word or morpheme, okay? Because you can have a word as a morpheme. Not go to the details. And then syntax is the sentence, etc. For systemic functional linguistics, it is the clause. That's the main unit of analysis. Consists of what? Processes. That's why we have different types of clauses. You know, in the example I showed you before, we have different types of. So processes expressed as verbal groups. Let's say combination of phrases, okay, and words, of course. Participants and circumstances. So we have this, okay? It consists, the clauses consist of these. It consists of processes, of participants, of, okay, circumstances, expressed as adverbial groups or prepositional phrases. Okay. Expressed as the participant expressed as nominal groups. So notice the difference between the traditional terminology we use, we are familiar with. We use nouns, etc. Here he's talking about nominal groups. Okay, prepositional phrases, that's normal. Adverbial groups, and then verbal groups. What do we mean by verbal? It's related to verb. Okay, verb, yes, verbal phrase, yes. So here we are, processes, and usually processes, we're talking about the actions, the events, the states. That's why we have verbs. Participants, we are talking about the person, the people. So that's why we have nouns, okay, nominal groups. And then circumstances, we are talking about the how. It's related to the modes, okay, mode, tenor, etc. Good. Fine. Now, how systemic functional linguistics views the clauses. So, processes involve participants in certain circumstances. No more talking about subject, verb, complement, direct object, direct, etc. So we're talking about processes, participants, and circumstances. So processes involve participants in certain circumstances. Also, in traditional terminology we use, we have what we refer to as the agents, doer of the action, receiver of the action, etc. Okay? So, processes involve participants in certain circumstances. And that's the clause. That is the clause, okay? A clause, you have processes involving participants in certain circumstances. In a clause, this is what you should have. Another thing you want to bear in mind is how the notion of function exists in every aspect of analysis of the language. So, processes involve function participants in certain circumstances, okay? Systemic functional. The reasons why we use language. Why? To do what? So, processes involve participants in certain circumstances. That's systemic functional linguistics, not grammar. Okay? You can also use the word grammar, but I want to be just consistent. Now, functional labels that indicate the role of each element in the clause. Okay? These are functional labels. Okay? They are functional labels and they indicate the role, processes, participants, and circumstances. The role of each element in the clause. Now, we take some words, some sentences from the text, and then analyze it using these notions in relation to field and ideational metafunction. Now, my favorite pet is my parrot. Participant, my favorite pet. Process, participant. Traditional terminology, we're going to say verb, subject, verb, complement, okay, predicate, whatever. He is an African grey. Participant, process, and participant as well, because we have no circumstance in here. Okay, that is to say, you can have only participant and process without circumstance, and not normal. That's the kind of sentence we can have. Or you can have a kind of complex sentence where you can have participant, process, and the circumstance, the how. We call him parrot. We call him parrot. Participant, process, participant, participant. You can have more than one participant, sometimes two or more, depending on the sentence, depending on the clause, using the systemic functional linguistics terminology. So for example, this last one here, we have three participants, okay? Three. Yes, three, and then him, and then parrot. Yes. The normal traditional grammar terminology, we're going to say subject, verb, complement, indirect object, and so on. Okay? But here in systemic, you have just one term to mean the same thing. It is the participant. Okay? Also, you can have a receiver of action or agents, okay, doer of the action. But here you have one thing, participant. Last example, where we can have a circumstance, we got him about 5 years ago. Participant, process, participants, and then circumstance. Yes, so the how or the when here, we have when, 5 years ago. Okay? So that's field and additional metafunction. Now, process types. So we have transitivity. Okay, so here normally the word transitivity is related to the normal one which you know transitive, etc. But in this context, we're talking about processes, types of processes involved, and the relations to the roles of the participants and how the processes, roles, and circumstances relate one to another. Okay, so the relationship between all these elements. That's the processes, right? And we can have 6 types according to this systemic functional linguistics, 6 types of processes. So we have relational, material, verbal, existential, behavioral, mental. And remember, when I first introduced today for you the word processes, we were talking and I'm focused on the one element word, which is the verb. And in English, we can have different types of verbs, okay? You can have verbs of existence. That's why existential. I'm starting here to explain what we mean by that. Action. So that's why you have behavioral, then mental, then verbal. So it refers to the types of verbs. And those are processes, okay? And no more talking about just transitive, the traditional transitive versus intransitive verbs. So we're going further into describing verbs. Okay. So relational processes, clauses. So here I'm starting talking about the types of clauses, because the types of clauses are determined by the types of verbs included in those clauses. So relational process clauses refer to being and existing. We call them relational processes, and of course relational process clauses. Be and the verb exist. Be, okay. There are other verbs like seem, look, become, have. Okay? Okay, I'm just repeating okay to make sure that you understand. So don't, okay? So that's the, so processes, and on the basis of the different types of processes, we can determine the different types of clauses. So here the first one. First type of clause, first type of process. Relational process clauses, and they refer to being and existing, and these clauses include verbs like be, seem, look, become, have. Okay? Example. My favorite pet is my parrot. Here we have the verb is. It refers to existing, okay, relational process clause. So here we have another word like identifier, identified. Another way terminology used in addition to participant. Okay, relational process. It helps to identify the type of clause. That's why I put that arrow there. How are we going to identify this type of clause? On the basis of the process. And how are we going to identify the process, the type of relationship of the process? It's via the verb, the type of meaning conveyed, again coming to meaning, conveyed by the verb. So here we have being, existing, so it is a kind of relational process clause. Okay, another example is, okay, attributive clauses. So he has a gray body and a red tail. His beak is very sharp. He hasn't got name. So you notice the verbs there: has, is, and hasn't got. All of them, they mean be and exist. Okay? So they are relational processes. They are attributive. Now, anybody can tell me the difference between identifying clause and attributive clause? Look at the examples. Hmm? No, it has nothing to do with the form, because you can notice is up, and in the second example we have is as well. His beak is very sharp. My favorite pet is my parrot.
In identifying clauses, it is possible to reverse the participant. For example, you can say, my parrot is my pet. It is possible to say it is like a certain
Yes, somehow. My favorite pet is my parrot. His break is very sharp.
In attribute, there is only the adjective phrase and the noun phrase. But in the identified phrase, there is only the noun phrase.
Yes? My parrot is my favorite. Yes, that's one way, but not. Yes, it is there, but not exactly what is the meaning of identifying and attributive clauses. You have the word attribute, to attribute something to something, someone or something. Yes. Now, my favorite pet is my parrot. So here you are not attributing something to you are just identifying. Yes. But for the other ones, he has a gray body. You attribute body to he. His beak is very sharp. Sharp, you attribute this quality to his beak. He hasn't got a name. You attribute this quality of name to the parrot, he. But my favorite pet is my favorite pet is my parrot. You are not attributing, you are just identifying who is, what is. Okay? Yes, all of them you are describing. But in describing, you can have identifying, okay? Or you can have attribution. My favorite pet is my parrot. You are not attributing anything to your favorite pet. You are not adding any quality. Are you describing your pet here? Yes.
Can we say that attribution generally are stated through a possessive adjective?
So usually, there is something like that, yes. Possession. You have, okay? So, existing, but there is the notion of be and existing in there, okay? But the notion of be and existing, we're talking about attributive clauses. You attribute something to something, okay? So that's why the type of relational process helps you identify again these two types of clauses, identifying clauses and attributive clauses. He has a gray body and a red tail. You have this quality, a gray body and a red tail. You attribute it to the parrot. His beak is very sharp. Very sharp as a quality. You attribute it not to any other thing. You attribute it to his favorite pet. Attribution. Attributive clauses. He hasn't got a name. Name, you attribute it to the parrot. Okay? Yes, the parrot, favorite pet. But for the first one, my favorite pet is who? Identifying. You are not describing. You are not attributing. Okay? You are not attributing. You are just identifying your favorite parrot. Your favorite pet. Okay. Another kind of processes again, my process clauses, again on the basis of the verbs, so now we talked about relational process clauses because we include verbs like be and exist, okay? Now, material process clauses, yes, verbs of doing, about actions performed. That's what we're talking about here. Ran, jump, arrive, leave, eat, and drink. Using the traditional terminology, if you remember in semester 1 and 2, we talked about stative verbs and action verbs. That's our terminology, okay? But here we are talking about this new terminology, material process clauses. Actors as participant and may have a goal as a second participant. That is to say, he hit Ahmed. So you have he, participant, and have a goal as, okay, etc. So we're going to see. We got him about 5 years ago. Okay. He can bite you. Okay, he can bite you. The normal terminology is direct object. He bought a book, or he broke the window. We got him. Okay, he can bite you. But using the terminology of systemic functional linguistics, they talk about goal. You have the parties actor, material process, goal, and circumstance. Another thing you can notice is, depending on the kind of clause, you have its own terminology, because the meaning is different. Okay? The meaning for the first one, we are talking about be and exist. The meaning is different, so it has its own terminology, suitable for that. But here we are talking about another different kind of meaning, which is material process clauses. We are talking about action. We are talking about doing. We are talking about verbs like ran, jump, arrive. So it should by nature, by logic, have its own kind of terminology, different from the ones of relational process clauses. So actor, he. Material process, goal, circumstance. The traditional terminology, we can also use the subject, yes, and then we can also talk about goal as a receiver of the action. Receiver, or you can talk about direct objects or indirect objects, etc. Complement, whatever. And circumstance, that's about 5 years ago. Verbal process clauses. We have the word verbal. When we're talking about verbal, we're talking about words. And what is the action suitable for words? Is say, tell. So we're talking about verbal process clauses, meaning processes of saying. Okay? The participants are sayer, receiver, and verbiage. Verbiage, what does this mean? A lot of speaking, a lot of okay, speaking. That's the meaning, okay? He can say, coming back to our extract of the child, text of the child, where he says this sentence, he can say lots of words like hello, how are you today? We call him parrot. So you see again the terminology suitable for this kind of clause. We have sayer, verbal process, receiver, verbiage. Okay? Good? Now, the next one. Mental process clauses, thinking and feeling. So again, on the basis of the kinds of verbs used in these kinds of clauses referred to as mental process clauses, they are all usually verbs related to thinking and feeling. Mental, feeling, okay, mental activity, and then emotional activity, feeling, okay? Verbs are think, feel, see, believe, want, and like. May contain two participants, a sensor and a phenomenon. Okay, so I have to stop in here the recording, and then I will continue after I charge my battery. Okay, hopefully it is